say that I'm not your stereotypical person you think would be a radical Islamist extremist lady. I was maybe. I often get that response, but I had quite a nice upbringing. I went to a lovely Quaker boarding school. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when I got to university. I was very ambitious, and I really wanted to succeed. I started to again grow my interest in the subject of religion. For my A-levels, I've done history and politics, and it really interested me. In particular, Islam interested me. The obvious place for me was to go to the Islamic Society. In a very short time, I started to become quite involved with what these guys were saying. They'd invite me to secret meetings, and they were all invitation only, so it was even more exciting, for a young person to be invited to these meetings. And at these meetings, we'd discuss various ills of the world and how we could implement Sharia, and how this Islamic glorious Khilafah state would return to its former glory. And I was sold this whole utopia. You have to concentrate on your political Islam in order to bring about the spiritual Islam again. There's atrocities going on around the world, and a lot of them were taking place in the Arab world. And drawing of my attention that this is not by coincidence, this is a hatred of Islam, this is why these people are being attacked. And it seemed like a viable story at the time, because there was nothing else on offer. That seemed very believable. Eventually, from becoming quite open-minded, started to really take on board what I was being told by these various groups that I was hanging around with, and eventually I became quite passionate about what they were saying, and started to speak the same rhetoric as them. The conviction I had in this ideal, the conviction I had in this glorious state which would, help the people of Chechnya, of Bosnia, of Palestine, and they would solve their problems, and we'd be able to defeat the Western powers who hate Islam. It seemed like such a reality that it would happen if we persevered with this type of recruiting people, almost like a communist type of ideal as well. So for 10 years I was talking and speaking about these issues with people. And then I had my little pivotal moment as well. After a child is involved as well in my story. It was actually my third child, but my third child was born on the exact day of one of the July bombings. And I was actually in labour at the time, and there was a television in my room, and I could see the shocking images, the buses have been totally blown apart. And so many emotions just came flooding in. Also I was having a child, so that was a big deal, but then seeing that it was very profound. Also a realisation that, hang on, the perception of Islam is exceptionally negative, and this is going to make it even worse. People are going to think Islam is evil, and the suffering of ordinary Muslims will be even greater. And basically, this idea is totally wrong. I was given time to be with my child, and a few months later, I had a complete reassessment of my actions, of my position, just looking at my life in general. And I started, which I'd never done before, when you're part of a group like I was involved in, they don't allow you to question. If you question, then you're not sincere. If you question, then you should be part of this movement, and I didn't want to not be part of the movement. If you question these beliefs, you're not a true believer. So, but after I'd had my third child, I had the confidence to question, and that's what I did. And as soon as the questions came out, realization that this is not a group that I actually want to be involved in, they asked me to leave, because it doesn't work if you don't toe the line. they need people to be completely convinced and brainwashed into believing in their values, otherwise their movement won't work. So, because I questioned, I was asked to leave. So I got a real taste of doing the actual opposite of what I was doing before, was preaching, like, you know, paranoia and misconceptions, and putting ideas into people's heads that, you know, the Western nations are out to destroy Islam, and it took a long time for me to not believe that anymore. So hopefully, you know, types of work that ISD are doing can continue, and hopefully I can continue some of the work that I'm doing as well. So that's my story, as I said now.
Thank you so much.
Do you think the universities have some responsibility here? These groups are operating on the campuses, and if so, what should they or could they do? Because obviously they are torn between this dilemma of advocating and pushing freedom of speech, which they should be doing, but also not allowing that kind of radicalisation to take place on campus. That's the first part. The second part was I recently held a workshop with some alimas in Leicester, some of whom were saying that they felt there's an overemphasis on the ummah that is exploited in the Muslim communities, and it's taking kids away from focusing on their own communities around them and the different faiths around them. They were really strong in their views, really wanted some mechanism for being able to be effective with those views in the community. What would your advice be to them in quite a patriarchal community to be able to be heard? Because what they're saying is fantastic.
Well, as it happens, I am trying to, you have to work with Whitehall in order to get some kind of, you have to work with them. I am trying to put a proposal through based on what I touched on, where I got two quite opposing societies, the Israeli society and the Middle East society, to co-host something, and to bring that model into campus, to make it a natural place to learn about others, to learn about stories, to learn about culture. And that's not what happens on campus at the moment. It's all very much, yes, I belong to the Islamic society, yeah, I belong to the Israeli society, and they don't mix, and then they leave university not knowing one thing about one another at all, and that's quite a shame, massive shame. So if I can start doing this project, hopefully they'll give me a little bit of funding to do it, to help facilitate some collaborative work on campus between the various societies and make it a normal cultural thing to do.
What really happens in practice when you bring these societies together? Can you just share a little bit of that without sort of...
well, when we first did an event, I thought it was going to be really difficult to get the Israeli society and the Middle East society to come together. I thought that's not going to happen. But actually, all it took was me to ask. And when I asked, they said yes. And it was really straightforward, because I think a lot of the young people are just waiting to find the opportunities, or waiting for someone to come up and advise, or say, would you like to do this event? And it went through quite smoothly, although there were some people that did boycott the event because it is quite controversial, and you know, it's not all nicey-nicey. There are people who did disagree with it. So, but as you said, that it's a good sign that some people are disagreeing with it, because you're doing something right. I think that the communities, the Muslim communities, need to work harder, in my view, to make things more exciting for younger individuals to get involved in things, and be more creative, and perhaps get some advice from other communities that have got youth groups, etc. There is work being done, but it's not really wide scale.
You're trying to compete with extremists who've got a really good product to sell, right? And I guess the challenge we always have through the AVE network is, you know, we're doing work to try and push back on extremism, but what are you suggesting instead? What's your alternative proposition? Don't go to Syria. Do what instead? You know, I mean, I'm sorry to give a very crude example, but you know, to impassioned young people, I think there's a responsibility on us as people trying to push back on this to come up with some, you know, to work with young people to come up with some damn good alternatives that are going to make them jump out of bed in the morning to to want to do it. It's, you know, I mean, it sounds really obvious, but just don't do something. It's a bit like your classical music versus, you know, you've got to, you know, you need an alternative. You need, you know, there needs to be a compelling counter proposition that you come up with young people themselves. But you know, just the sort of don't do this is not gonna cut it.
Right.
You're absolutely right. Having a, you know, we need to compete. We need to compete with extremists. I think I feel very strongly about that.
It's hard because as part of my work as well, I do some interventions, and that's where I speak with young individuals who are quite vulnerable. And one lady wanted to go to Syria, and I'm trying to say there's no point, because if you're doing it with the idea that you're helping Muslims, there are Muslims everywhere. There's Muslims on your doorstep, your neighbour next door. And then I was trying to say, why don't you go to the homeless shelter? You know, and then she was like, why would I want to go there? You know, yeah, that's very nice, but those people need me more. So it is very difficult.